Okay, thank you everybody for joining this Bible study. I will break the introduction into small voice notes so you can follow notes one by one. I hope you will write down whatever important points you observed during this study. Yes, the book of Ecclesiastes is believed to be written by King Solomon, probably in his middle age or old age. Now, anyone who has read the book of Proverbs quite often is in for a surprise, because Ecclesiastes brings out a very different side of Solomon. And that's why there is also a little confusion about who wrote this book, and also because he introduces himself as a preacher in the beginning, which is a very unlikely title taken up by Solomon. When we look into the book, we'll find that there is a very obvious character who emerges very strongly. He's a critic. When you read the book, it appears as if it is written by a man who did not believe in God, because there is no talk of God in the entire book and no praise of God. Rather, you will notice a very critical approach about life, reasonings and logic and thoughts that unsettle anybody who reads the book. It's quite a depressing book in one sense, and sometimes also suggests doing things that the rest of the Bible doesn't suggest. So in the book you see a critic emerging, and on the other side you also see somebody who perhaps has not made up his mind about life, somebody who has no particular view about life. So somebody like a humanist who is willing to do anything and everything in his lifeline just for the heck of it, because nothing is defining his life or nothing is defining his lifestyle. So when you read the book, more than King Solomon emerging, you will see this very peculiar character standing and talking to you. He is a critic and mostly has a humanist's point of view. Now, why does Solomon allow a critic kind of a figure or a character to be portrayed through his book? It's exactly because Solomon also wants us to listen to the critic inside of him. Why? You may ask why. It's because a book like Proverbs is a very idealistic book. It gives a very idealistic view of life. That means if you do certain things, you are bound to get certain results. For example, if you follow wisdom, then you will always see prosperity. If you do hard work, you will always see results and blessings in your life. So there is a certain kind of do's and the attached obvious consequences of it. Now, Solomon observed in his life that though values like those spoken about in Proverbs need to be in place, life is usually not like that. Life doesn't go as expected. There will be ups and downs. There will be situations in life when you have done so many things, but yet something else is happening. That's why he will come and say that the race doesn't always belong to the strongest or the fastest. Those who deserve will usually not necessarily get it. So that is the reason why he brings out a critic inside of this book. I want you to notice a few things that this critic highlights through the entire book. And there are three major themes that emerge out of the critic's observation when you study the book of Ecclesiastes. Three major issues. Number one, time. Number two, death. Number three, randomness. The march of time, the certainty of death, and the randomness of life. So when he talks about the march of time, he talks about how one generation passes and the next comes, and then the another comes, and the one that comes later on forgets the previous one. So there is a march of time. Time finishes off everybody. I mean, the identity and the existence of everybody becomes a zero in front of time. Then he talks about death. that whatever you do in life, ultimately death is going to capture you. Whether you are a fool or a wise man, a strong or a weak man, a rich or a poor man, death is a big equalizer. And when that comes, everything becomes useless. All the labor under the sun looks useless. Now, between these thoughts about time and death, the critic raises the question of randomness, about how anything can happen to anybody. So you do certain things expecting certain results, but that may not happen. So again, as I said earlier, the critic views draw a very depressing picture of life, and we will see that he incorporates these ideas about time and death and randomness throughout the entire book of Ecclesiastes. Now, when we look through Ecclesiastes, there is another interesting aspect that comes out, and that is that the critic is not just a philosopher. He is not just thinking and bringing out a perspective. When we read his arguments, you understand that he is somebody who has actually gone through all that. So it's like a reflection that is drawn out of hindsight. It's a post facto musing, post facto reflection. What I mean to say is, he has done all that, and then now he is asking the questions. So it is not a set of rules like usually the books in the Bible are, set of rules that are full of preventive or precautionary measures, but questions coming out of what a man has already done. It's not looking into the future, it is looking into the past and asking the questions. So in that sense, the points raised by the critic are very, very convicting. So this book is a must read for those people who never heed to warnings, be it from parents, elders, pastors. If you are a person who does not like to be told, don't do this or don't do that, then you must listen to Ecclesiastes or read through Ecclesiastes. In fact, people who do the contrary of what is being told, or who have a tendency to cross the lines and venture into things that are denied, have a urge in them to try everything once. This book is for them. Now, when you come to the end of the book of Proverbs, you will understand that the entire book doesn't talk about God, but it is directing every reader towards God. It doesn't highlight God, but it highlights the grimness and the hopelessness in the alternative to God. So it doesn't preach the gospel per se, but it gives the option, goes to the option. So if there is somebody who has not chosen God, he's gone to an alternative. So whatever is that alternative is, the critic highlights the grimness or the hopelessness in that alternative, and thus highlights God. So it is very similar to how an apologetic preacher would approach sharing Christ, so something like Ravi Zacharias. So it's a very interesting book to read from that perspective. Now let me share with you the crux of the entire book. After introducing himself in the first verse, Solomon gives out the conclusion of his book. In verse 2 itself, he tells us what he has concluded. So actually, if you have read verse 2, you don't have to read the rest of the book. That is what he is going to establish through the entire book. But that's the style of writing, telling beforehand that this is the conclusion, and with this prejudice you have to read the rest of the book. Now what is in verse 2? Verse 2 declares that all is vanity. The Hebrew word used there is HEVEL, H-E-V-E-L. It literally means vapor or smoke. But many scholars want to treat it differently. Most of them treat it as meaninglessness, emptiness, vanity, or a big zero. So if it's a big zero, then the writer is saying vanity of vanities, which means everything is a zero of zeros. I mean, it ends up as nothing. But probably that is not a very accurate translation, because life is not absolutely zero. There may be a lack of meaning in it, uh, a lack of clarity in it, but it is not a zero. So perhaps the understanding of life being a vapor is a more accurate understanding of life. So, like a vapor or a smoke, life does have some shape, and we seem to enjoy that shape of life. But the moment we feel that we have got a grip of it, it escapes from our grip. When we feel that okay, life is settling in, tragedy strikes, and there it goes. So we never are able to get a grip of life. That's the conclusion of Solomon. Never ever think that you will ever settle down in life and have a grip over life. That's not for those who are on the right path. It will never come into your hands. Also, the smoke talks about a lack of clarity. So what Solomon is conveying is that life is a little confusing. It is not as simple as we want it to be. Solomon is not somebody who is crying out like that fox who declared about the sour grapes. Solomon was somebody who had everything. Whatever he set his eyes on, he got it. So when he comes to such a conclusion, we have to sit and notice there is substance in his conclusion. We should take him seriously. Now I will come to the reason why I chose the book of Ecclesiastes and why nothing else. We are at a very crucial juncture of entire human history. After this, we will go into the chapter 1 and the study of it, and then we'll go into discussions. But it's important for me to tell you why I chose Ecclesiastes. Coronavirus has brought the world on its knees. Not a 19th century, 20th century world, it's a 21st century world. A world that was floating in the excitement of the advancements made in technology, especially artificial intelligence. A world that was thinking of colonies in the skies, was flaunting driverless cars, had made advances in genetics and pharmacy, and felt it was almost in control of everything happening in the world. And then a virus arrives on the scene, blows the bubble. Mighty nations are on its knees. It's the developed nations which have suffered the most. People are so scared that they look at other people as potential weapons. I'm sure you must have come across so many videos. Right from socializing on social media, we have been thrown into a social distancing. In such a time where we have all been reduced to bare essentials, I felt it is a good time to go through Ecclesiastes, because it is a time when everything looks like vanity. And it's a good time to think again about these questions, because the world is asking these questions right now, and as time passes, they will continually keep asking questions. You must have read on Twitter and Facebook that how this lockdown is making philosophers out of people around us. So two things. One is, it is going to be a good reminder. The study of Ecclesiastes is going to be a good reminder for us, because we tend to forget that all that this world offers is a vanity. We forget that this is vanity and we start chasing it. Ecclesiastes will remind us that it is vanity. Number two, it will also prepare us to ask questions to those around us in our workplaces, neighborhood, relatives. And also people will ask questions, so we should be ready to give the answers. The harvest is ready around us, and we need to be ready with the kind of thoughts that they might be going through, or we can ask them. Thank you everybody for your answers. I saw a contrast there in the verses 3 to 8. There are two things that are highlighted in those verses. One is when the preacher talks about, the critic talks about, generations come and generations go. And the contrast to it is when he talks about nature, that the sun comes and goes, the wind comes and goes, the river goes into the sea. So what are the contrasts? Number one, on one side is man. So some of you said that, you can see cycles there. I mean, that is true. So generations are in a cycle, but man is having one limited life. So man comes and he goes, he never comes back. Unlike a river which comes back, unlike a wind that comes back, unlike a sun that comes back, a man comes and he goes forever. Generations keep coming. So mankind keeps himself in a cycle, but the man never comes back. So one of the things is about one limited life, and the contrast of it is the endless cycles of things. Okay. So let's go back to the question that is posed in verse number 3. The question is, what profit hath a man of all his labor wherein he laboureth under the sun? What's the answer? No profit. There is no profit. And to establish this fact that there is no profit is why he talks about verses number 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. Generations come and go without returning, and he adds that previous generations are already forgotten, and those who are coming later will not be remembered. So there is a meaninglessness in man's existence on his planet, because after a while he is gone and nobody remembers him. His efforts, his labor, everything is in vain. It takes nothing along, so what does it profit him? On the other side, when he talks about nature, what he is also trying to say is that within this limited life, the eyes and the ears and the desires of man, none of them are ever satisfied. So there is one life which on the whole is meaningless, but inside this life, his eyes are chasing things, his ears are wanting to hear things, his desires are after things. None of them ever get satisfied. They grow weary and tired and yet keep running after those things that he has never tried. And it goes on like an endless cycle, which is also seen in nature. To explain how we remain unfulfilled is why he brings out the sun, the moon, the wind, the river, and all those things. So what are the two major reasons cited by the critic of why there is no profit? Number one, meaninglessness. Number two, unfulfillment. Why is there no profit? Two things. Meaninglessness. Number two, unfulfillment. Okay. Now, while we remain at this point, I want to stress about the fact that no one will be remembered. One of the greatest pursuits of man is to make a name for himself so that people will know him. Some do succeed and their name does live on for a while, or to a limited geographical area, or to a certain elective. But how many will remember for how long? Tell me, how many of you know James Maxwell? Many of us know John Maxwell. Most of us do not know James Maxwell. He is the father of modern physics. How many of us know Tim Berners-Lee? He is the creator of the World Wide Web, modern internet. We are supposed to know his name. If I ask you from our own history, how many of you know Durgabai Deshmukh or Dadabai Nauroji? We will not know them. They were stalwarts in that time, but nobody remembers them. And even if we do remember some of these names, how many times have you thought about these names in the last 10 years? So making a name for oneself also seems to be a worthless exercise. Some of us, though believers, have this desire inside of us, that kuch karna hai. कुछ नाम बनाना है, you know. But the critic is very point blank in saying that nobody is going to remember you. Some of you may know Rockefeller, but we don't remember Rockefeller every day. So what's the use of becoming a Rockefeller? And remaining at that very thought, I also want to, the question that, what is the profit? I want to take you on a tangent. One of the things that the critic says is that whatever we do on the earth in our lives, we have to determine profitability. We have to think about what we will actually gain at the end of anything that we do. We have to evaluate the end and then do something. It is mandatory for a man to think about profitability. See, that's what comes out in the parable of the talents. 5 made 10, 2 made 4, 1 did not make anything. God expects us in our stewardship to determine what investment of ours will end up in profitability. See, when we run a company, the liquidity and the cash flow allows for a lot of good things to happen along the way. So there is AC in the office, there is lunch coming, there is cool drink served, there is travel allowance, stay allowance. A lot of goodies are enjoyed when the company is running through the year because liquidity is there, cash flow is there. But just because things are going well during the year does not mean that that company will last long. What determines the longevity of the company is when a periodic assessment of its fund flow is done, that is, when a periodic assessment of its fund inflow vis-a-vis fund outflow is done, that is net outflow or inflow is done. If the inflow is not positive, that means if the company in periodic assessment is not making a profit, it is glaring at doom. So it is mandatory for us to not just evaluate ourselves at the beginning of a decision, but we should continuously and periodically assess our lives, look at the decisions we make, and see if there is profitability coming at the end of it. We have to constantly consider profitability. Also talking about the endless cycles, when the critic points out about the river and the sun and the wind and everything, we see a contrast to what the psalmist says. Psalmist says in Psalm 19 that the heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament showeth his handiwork, and all of God's creation is actually speaking about God, glorifying God. And here, when the critic puts out the same creation, when he talks about the sun, when he talks about the wind, when he talks about the river and the sea, it's a very grim picture. It doesn't look like it's glorifying God. It is a reminder of the weariness of man, the tiredness of, or the meaninglessness, or the discontentment or the unfulfillment in the life of man. So it is the same nature. David sees it as glorifying God. The critic sees it as a reminder of the vanity of man's life. So the same thing is seen by two different people as reminders of two different things. We have to always remember this, that our perspectives and our attitudes have a great influence on how we interpret things we see in life. It is always important to work on our perspectives and attitudes because they have a great bearing on the interpretation. Psalmist sees glory of God. The critic sees vanity of man. The second question, is there a thing whereof it may be said, see, this is new? So the second question only seems to strengthen the conclusions made by the first question. There is nothing new. Man goes through the same cycle of need and greed. The same story of wretchedness continues from generation to generation. Only thing is that it is now played out by different character in every generation. It's the same story. Just like, for example, in a historical movie, the roles are played by different actors in different movies and in different time periods. Same is the story of all of history. Whatever we see, all the stories in Saas Bahu serials and movies, everything we see in the lives of people around us, it has happened before. Only different characters are playing it. And this is what Solomon tells about 2500 or 3000 years ago. So, if that was the story then, and I'll come to that. Some of you may think our world has come a long way since then. But I will tell you how Solomon has come to these conclusions later on as we go a little more down. So there is nothing new that is happening. Now, we all think that our situation and circumstances are very unique and not like the ones that others are facing or others have ever faced. However, Solomon is sure that things used to be new only for our ancestors, and by then, that means by the time of Solomon, so many had already lived on the planet that he only saw repeats. Now let me give you an example. When people fall in love, they often think of their story to be very different from those who loved before them. कि भाई उनका अलग है, हमारा अलग है. Our love is very different. We are very sincere. We will die for each other. However, it is always the same. Nothing is new. And when we go through different situations in our life, we tend to think like that. Okay, this is something new in all of history. It is not. Therefore, it is always wise to take advice from those who have an experience earlier than us, or people who are elder to us, because they might have gone through the same thing, or they might have seen a similar thing. We do not have to fall every time to learn. Now, I also want to give you a caveat that it will be wrong for us to take Solomon's statement that nothing is new as an absolute declaration. He is only saying that man cannot do anything new because he is caught up in this web, this admixture of sin and pleasure. He cannot do anything new. He is now limited by what this world and the sin and his pleasures demand. So same stories repeat through his life. However, God can still do new things. Therefore, in and through the story of Jesus Christ, we see things taking an unexpected and a new turn. So we read about a new covenant. We read about a new creation, new nature, a new understanding of purity, a new way of living, a new help provided by the Holy Spirit, a new help from the angels, a new access to power and authority in Jesus, a new protection in the blood of Jesus, a new community of believers as a new family. Only God can make things new. So when we reach this place where we can feel very hopeless about nothing new happening in our lives, if we yield to God, who is the God of newness, who can do new things in our lives, we can see a change. Now I come to the last part of this Bible study, where we come to verse number 13. Atul had cited it at the very beginning, that how the verse 13 is a very interesting verse to meditate upon. We saw so far till verse number 12 that Solomon clearly has made his conclusions through chapter 1. However, he takes us through the journey from chapter number 2 to 12. He takes us through a journey and tells us what all he thought and how he reached this conclusion. And the process he employs, the understanding with which he approaches this entire quest, is laid out in verse number 13. And I want you to grasp that concept. He says, I applied my heart to seek and search out. Then he says, consider all things under heaven. And I saw that it was a sore travail, and that God has given this task to be exercised. 5 things that come out from this verse number 13. I applied my heart to seek and search out, consider all things under heaven, and this is a sore travail that God has given this task to be exercised. The 5th thing. Let me go through all these 5 points. Point number 1, I applied my heart. He did not make a half-hearted approach to understanding life. See, you have to understand that Solomon is somebody who got an opportunity to own everything or please his heart with everything he wished. And at the end of all that, he was unfulfilled and unsatisfied. A person like that who got everything and then found meaninglessness and lack of fulfillment, such a person will be frustrated. He would give up. But Solomon doesn't. He says that I applied my heart. That means I have not lost my passion on zeal. After getting everything on this planet and after finding meaninglessness, I have not given up. I am standing yet again. I am putting all passion and zeal. I have decided to put my entire being to find out what is the real meaning of life. That is something we have to learn. When we, as followers of Christ, decide that the things of this world are not a priority and set our minds on heavenly things or things which are priority in the kingdom, do we apply our heart? Or is our heart only partially put into our efforts? Is our approach half-hearted? Are we only partly into finding the answers to our questions? Now, that's sadly the story of Christians. That our pursuit of God lacks passion and zeal, lacks commitment. And the things that we pursue, like meaning of life, like spiritual things, like heavenly things, or kingdom concepts, these are difficult things. So it is required that we apply our heart into this pursuit. Otherwise, we will not get it. The second thing the preacher says, or the critic says, is that I seek and search out. Seek and search, they look very similar words, but they are different words. Seeking is different, searching is different. Seeking means to go deeper into something. Searching is to go further away and look for other options. I'll tell you, many people seek, do not search. Many people search and never seek. What happens? Those who seek become like frogs in the well. So they know too much about few things. And those who search and never seek, they know too much. They know little about so many things. They are jacks of all. So their understanding is very shallow and they never reach anywhere with anything. The critic says, I applied my heart to seek and search out. So I kept my set much wide. I considered a lot of things and I went into the details of those things. Again, another folly of Christians is that we are too happy with too little. We sing 2 songs, God answers 2 of our prayers, we read 1 Bible chapter, very quickly satisfied. We need to seek and search. See, understand also one thing. Your wisdom is limited by your knowledge. Solomon was the wisest, and yet after living a good part of his life, he decided to seek and search out. Think about it. He was already wise. Why does he have to seek and search out? That means he decides to gather more knowledge. Solomon knew that one can only be as wise as the things they know. The more you know, the more database on which you build your wisdom and your wisdom operates, the wiser you will be. You want to become wise? Of course, James 1:5 says, any of you lack wisdom, ask of God and He gives to everybody liberally. But we also have to build knowledge. We have to read, we have to learn. Never stop learning. As good your knowledge is, so good your wisdom will be. Now I want to bring out the third point. Consider all things under heaven. He applied his heart to seek and search, and in the process he considered all things under heaven. He understands that he can only consider things that his senses can reach. There are things that we still do not understand that are not under the sun. However, he spreads his seeking and searching to everything he came across. There doesn't seem to be anything that Solomon would not have tried. He considered all things. All things. And that was a very dangerous path to take, because Solomon didn't want to make a half-informed decision. Maybe he is foolish because of everything he tried, are an indication for many of us who have come much later. Also, we need to sometimes tell ourselves that Solomon has tried everything we find around us, and he has been tempted more than any of us, and he has concluded that it is worthless, and there should be some truth in it. So you don't have to go by the principle कि यार life में सब कुछ एक बार try कर लेना चाहिए. Solomon ने try कर लिया है, and he finds it worthless, so I will not try it now. The fourth point is about sore travail. About the, I don't know, what's the other translation say about verse number 13 is that, this burdensome task, the sore travail. Solomon acknowledges that this exercise of seeking and searching for meaning in life is a laborious exercise. It is not easy. He calls it travail. Travail is what a mother feels while giving birth. Finding our answers for meaning in life and fulfillment are not easy. Most people, therefore, will never even attempt to ask the important questions in life. They do not have the time for it, patience for it, or the inclination for it. But remember, this lockdown is going to create many philosophers. 21 days, nothing else to do. They have all the time in the world. The situation is teaching them all the patience in the world, and the things that they are reading about, the news around them, is inclining them to start thinking about the important questions in life. It's a laborious exercise. Many people are into thinking these things. We should be ready. Why it is a burdensome task is also because the optional route is very easy. If you decide you don't want to find the answers and you just want to enjoy life, man, that is so easy. It comes so smoothly. Finding the answers is tough. So the effort itself is tough, and at the same time you have to keep resisting the offers come from the easier side. So it is a burdensome task. It's a sore travail. Also, if you read further down, I think it is in verse number 15. It says that what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. So, crooked and lacking. Solomon says that there are many twists and many gaps in this pursuit of meaning. That makes it more difficult. It's not simple. It will not come to you like data that is laid out on a paper. There are twists and there are gaps, which means you will have to put effort to add, to understand. That's exactly what God has done. He has not revealed himself completely in nature. He's revealed himself enough, but he has also hidden himself enough. So there are twists, there are gaps. The twist and gap has to be filled by us, and it is not easy. It's a twist and it's a gap. Also, as we discussed earlier, with more knowledge comes more sorrow. So it is a burdensome task. So now I come to the fifth point in verse number 13. God has given this task to be exercised. So you understand that God wants us to seek for meaning and fulfillment. It is His desire that we seek meaning and seek fulfillment. He has made man in such a way that he will look for meaning and fulfillment. Whatever comes his way, if he doesn't find meaning in it or fulfillment in it, he will be unsatisfied, he will be disturbed. The fact that he does not find meaning and fulfillment in things of this world is not a punishment, it is a mercy from God, so that we will continue to seek and finally find God, where meaning and fulfillment will come. So that's the crux of the whole chapter number 1. Everything under the sun is meaningless. We need to look beyond the sun. Let me conclude the Bible study today. As the world comes to its knees and people remain in lockdown and read and see the helplessness of the powerful governments and the nations of this world, there are questions rising in the hearts and minds of people. And I'm sure some of these questions are rising in our own minds. Many will think through these questions that are dealt with in these chapters. A harvest is getting ready. I was just reading about Life Church saying that in the last few days they have received 1,500 requests or rather notifications of people who have accepted Christ, which is unprecedented. It's a world record. I mean, for them, a world record means it's a record for them. So all this pandemic is creating a panic and people are looking out for answers. And the same is going to happen in India. Let's understand that most of them will be thinking at this point, and we need to be ready with questions for them, and we need to be ready with the answers too. God bless you.